council member, and now I'm a consultant for the Emeryville Property Owners Association and a freelance videographer. And so I follow all the issues with the city as well as the region.
Can you talk a little louder then?
Yes, okay. So I follow all the issues with the city as well as with the region. I video record all the regional meetings, and then all the city meetings, I break them down by topic and post them on the webpage. And I'm here to talk to you about the Emery ground because I've been following this issue for the last 3 years. When I became a consultant to the property owners, which is just a small group of commercial owners, they were concerned about the Emery ground assessment. And so they asked me to look into it. And so I looked into it and I'm familiar with all the facts. And I don't think the PBID is the right funding formula for the Emery ground. And one of the reasons for that is because you're being asked to participate in a district, and that district is about 90% commercial owners. So the residential component, you won't have much say. So once you're included in the district, if there's a vote, if everybody here votes no, you still win. And so the idea of allowing the Emery ground to be controlled by these property owners is really not the right thing. Last year, about a year and a half ago, when they stopped the service, they didn't really have to do that, but they stopped the service because they tried to get it okay. And so residents went to the city and he said, hey, you stopped the service. And the city said, well, we really don't have anything to do with it. You have to talk to the TMA. So you have a third party here that's controlling the bus. There's no service policy. There's no assurance of anything. So when you join this district, even if you went with the people, you want to make sure that you're going to get some assurance that you're going to have some service. Now, one of the inequities of the service is that there's 2 routes, and one of the routes has got 7 days a week service, and the other route has 5 days a week service. So the property owners in the North Hollis area, they get 5 days a week service, but they still pay the same rate as everybody else. So Mark, when you asked the question the other night, you said, well, gee, we don't need that frequent service. They're not even going to listen to that. You're not being told. Okay. So now the city created the Transportation Management Association, and that was created after the Emery ground was started. So you had 8 property owners that had their own shuttle, and the city came along and said, well, why don't we combine those shuttles and turn it into a bus? Okay, so we did that, and it was successful. So when they set up the board for the Emery ground, there's 10 seats on the board, and 7 of those seats are assigned to corporate owners. So those owners, they're not elected. There's no accountability at all. They can stop the service, they change routes without notifying anybody, and I think that's not right. The Emery ground started out to be a private shuttle, but now it's an essential public service. And it's almost like the police and fire. The city has to have some obligation to provide that service. Or if the service is not provided, the city has to have some ability to make sure it's provided. So that's really the main thing that I'm trying to accomplish here, is to get the city to have some control over the operation, if not total control. The businesses pay most of the taxes that run the city, but we control it because we live here. And it's the same with the Emery ground. We should control that. It's a quality of life issue. Now, some of you may remember 25 years ago when it first started, we used to have a Saturday shopper. And that would take people shopping and bring it back. And there's a lot of creative things we can do with the Emery ground. Now, going into this, once I realized we had these funding issues, I was thinking about the Alameda County sales tax, because for the last, 15 years, we've been paying, the city's been giving Alameda County $3.5 million of our sales tax money, and getting about $500,000 in return. And that's not a good deal. A lot of that money is going to fund projects in South County, like BART to Pleasanton, and road expansions, but we're not getting our fair share of that money. So I was very concerned about that, and that should be a major source of funding for the Emery ground. So I knew that the chair of the Transportation Commission is really determined to get BART to live more, and they know how important that project is to him. So I told him that I was going to create a competing ballot measure for Emeryville, so that you would have had a choice of voting on the county measure or the local measure. And if you prove the local measure, you get the whole $3.5 million. So when I told him that, he got really upset. He said, well, why did you do that? And after I explained it, So here's Stuart Blanchard, he's an attorney, he's worked for the property owner. So we went to the county commission and we threatened them with development here. And at the last second, they adjusted the expenditure plan, so now there's $300 million pot of money that can be used to fund the Emeryville. And that wasn't possible before. So I have a clip of that I want to show you here in a few minutes, so you can actually see that that money is available. But the problem is that the staff doesn't want anything to do with the operation. They don't want to handle any complaints, and I don't think that's acceptable. So they really haven't pursued the money, the sales tax money, and as a private service, they're not going to be eligible for operations money. And I think that's a shame, because I know we can get $2 million a year out of that, which is 2/3 of the budget. So your assessment can be very, very low. Now, when it started, residential properties weren't allowed to be assessed. And then there was a court ruling that said, well, if the residential properties are in the district and they're getting the benefit, then they must be assessed. And that's why they're assessing you. Now, it's interesting to note that the bus says, you know, a private shuttle provided by the business community. So that infers that you really weren't supposed to be assessed. And that's been the way it is. There's been a lot of development here, and the bus, in a way, was kind of a mitigation for that development to take place. But we can be creative here.
Didn't you work on getting that passed so that residents could be taxed?
No, as a matter of fact, I didn't have anything to do with it. In fact, last month, the city attorney decided to create a new ordinance about PBID. And so he created that ordinance, and he decided, well, state law allows PBID assessment to be 10 years, and he decided it should be 15 years. So he writes that in the ordinance, and he presents it to the city council without the direction of the city council, and the city council adopts it.
But you came out when they stopped the service
Yeah.
because of the road
Right.
fixing up. And they wanted to put it back, and there was all this to do about how it was funded. I remember you said the Watergate residents should pay for it.
As a matter of fact, that wasn't what I said. That was, you know, I never advocated that they stop the service. And I'm not, the courts decided that the residents should pay. And that, you know, that the court decided that, not I. And I even,
You supported it.
I was not an advocate for residents to pay. I was not an advocate for residents to pay. I mean, here I am, I'm working for property owners, and I mean, I'm not sure that they think that the residents ought to control it, but the only reason they can agree with it is because there's so much other money out there that it's kind of foolish to not pursue that
I'm
money.
pretty sure I have emailed you for now.
Can we stay on point, please? Can we stay on point?
So the point is, we need to get our fair share from the county, and I think it's not a private system. There's nothing about it that's private. And you know, the paper that I handed you is a law journal about PBID assessment. And if you look at the top of page 2, it makes a real point about what can be assessed and what can't. And you know, so they're saying that everybody gets a special benefit, and I'm not sure if they're not getting a general benefit. The special benefit would be the fact that this part of town has 7 days a week service, and that the Watergate Towers has express service. Now that's a special benefit that other people aren't paying, but there's no process to handle these complaints. I mean, if your assessment isn't right, you know, that assessment isn't right. There's no equity there. There's no geographic equity, and there's no plan. I mean, is there a plan to expand it throughout the whole city? We don't know. I mean, there's going to be capital costs coming up. They're going to need a bus yard, and they're going to need more buses. That's not included in the estimate for the people.
I was going to ask you a question. Who, as the city staff wants it, who is going to run the association? Is it private, or therefore can't get any of the sales tax revenue?
Well, they're not going to get it for operations. They might be able to get it to buy a bus or two, but they can't get it for operations. Now the sales tax measure, they fund Livermore Transit and they fund Emeryville Transit. Well, that's because it's in the territory of these other board members. And then the staff says, well, we can have a lobbyist. And that's so ridiculous. When you've got somebody sitting on that board, why are you going to hire a lobbyist? I mean, that's just a specious a specious idea. So, and then there was a meeting about a year and a half ago, where the board talked about the assessment, and when they talked about raising taxes, Jeff Sears from Wareham, he says, well, we can't vote for them, but we control the PBID. So I want to show you that video. And, so, anybody have any additional questions, ma'am?
Is the business improvement district the same size as Emeryville?
No, it's almost the same size, but it doesn't go to the triangle area of the city. That's the only area that's not served. But I'm sure those,
The triangle is?
triangle is the part of Emeryville, it's on the other side of San Pablo. It does stop at 40th and San Pablo, but I'm talking about 53rd and 55th Street. You know, and when it comes to stopping the service, I know that the city and the TMA were in on that together, because it wasn't an accident. I mean, if you're putting in a sidewalk and you realize the bus can't turn, you have to notice it. If the bus is going by every 20 minutes, you can't not realize that. And then all of a sudden, and you know, I hate to say this, but you know, there's a lot of politics involved with this stuff. So I went to a Marina committee, and I heard Nora Davis tell Bob Lane, well, the property owners said they'd sue the city if service was restored to Watergate. And I had to call her a liar right on the spot, because that is not the case. I mean, I'm here right now trying to protect our interests and protect the community's interest to have this service. I mean, you know, maybe we want to have a route that goes to West Oakland Bar. If any of you go to San Francisco, it's 3 extra stops to go to the MacArthur station. And the other thing is, from a regional perspective, the Emery carries 5,500 people a day, and that's 25% of all the people that go to the MacArthur bar station. That's a lot of people. And so it's not unreasonable for the region to pay for a lot of this service, but we are taking a lot of positive forward for the region. So I'm really here to advocate that we get Scott Donahue, our newest council member, and so I'm really here to advocate, and hope you would agree, that we need to get the money we got coming. We're giving them $7 million a year. And one of the reasons they reacted to the threat of the ballot measure is because there's no return to source requirement. So no matter how much money we give them, they don't have to give us anything except for the streets and road money. And over all these years, the city has not been advocating to get that money. It's always disturbed me when I was in the council, so now I took action, and so now it's possible to get a chunk of that money. So I just want to show you a clip of a board meeting, if I can find it really quickly here. And you know, the board, when you have these assigned seats, because I go to every one of those meetings, they are employees of these corporations. So you got the manager of IKEA sitting on the board, and people who have no connection to the community. I mean, if you ask any of them if they've ever rode the bus, they all tell you no. I mean, they're not connected. And so they shouldn't be making decisions about your service, even if they're paying for it. I mean, they couldn't tell you that you wouldn't have police or fire service, so they shouldn't tell you you can't have bus service, because that's really an essential component. You know, the value of private land is determined by transportation access. So the more transportation access, the more valuable the land. So I guess it was last month, Wareham has some new buildings over in West Oakland, so now Emeryville service is being extended to West Oakland. I mean, West Berkeley. And they're going to pay the fair share, they're not getting it for free, but just the idea that he has the power to just expand his service there, and where's the opportunity for other people? I mean, residents at 1500 Park would like to see the service go to West Oakland. So as I'm preparing to send out information about this, I asked the city clerk for a copy of the assessment roll for the Emeryville. So she sends me a list of the assessments and the parcel numbers without names and addresses. So I had to go back and get that. And then I want to know, well, what residential properties are going to be assessed? And she says, well, I can't send you that until the engineer's report is complete. Well, I don't want to wait for that. So as we stand here right now, there's certain properties in the other side of town, I don't know whether they're going to be assessed or not. And you know, if they are going to be assessed, somebody ought to tell them about it. You know, assessment districts are, you know, they're created, it's a taxing mechanism, and they're supposed to be created when property owners come to the city because they want some kind of a public improvement, whether it's a road, a park, whatever it is, and they agree to pay for it. So in an assessment district, if you get a majority of the people, then it forces the other people to pay. And so the Emeryville Property Owners Association, it was created because the city manager and Wareham, they created an assessment district for underground utilities. And none of the affected property owners knew about it. So after the engineer's report was complete, they sent a notice to these property owners that your property has been included in the district, along with a schedule of payments, and saying you can come down to the city council and you have the right to protest. Well, they already had a majority of the property signed up, so your ability to protest wouldn't exist. That was an $8.5 million district. And so there were 3 properties that consisted of the majority. Wareham that owned 45% of the land, the city owned 3% of the land, so you're actually using city land to contribute to this majority, and one other private property owner, Andy Getz. And I went to Andy and said, you know what, you're being used to assess these other property owners. Do you realize that? And he didn't realize that, so he withdrew his petition, and that's how that district was stopped. You know, and they waited to get me off the council to do that. Wareham built a new building in Powell and Hollis, and they undergrounded their utilities, but they made a deal with the staff there that if an assessment district was created, he would get $375,000 back, and that all these other owners would share in the cost of undergrounding their utilities. And that's one of the reasons why they wanted to get me off the council, because I don't believe in being unfair. I mean, you may remember years ago when the city decided they would tax residential landlords when now you need a business license. So they decided that they wanted to go back retroactive for 3 years. And I didn't want to do that. But they didn't pay any attention. Well, why don't you notify the property owners that you're going to consider it? They didn't want to do that either. So I've been battling with the staff for years about not doing things fairly, dismissing employees that shouldn't be. I mean, I spent a whole lot of time defending that, and then when I got off the council, I ended up with the property owners, and that became my line of work, watching City Hall full time. I mean, so it's interesting. So now I go to all the regional meetings, and so I'm aware of what's available out there, and there's going to be state cap and trade money coming down for transit. Millions of dollars, because they want to reduce greenhouse gas, and transit is one of the ways to do this. So, you know, if we go with this for 15 years, then you're locked in. And the way PBID works is they make a recommendation to the council, and then the council goes with the assessment. But really, the council is supposed to go along with their recommendation. Generally, that's the way the law is written. So it doesn't mean it has to be that way, but that's the way it was. So when we asked not to have the assessment raised, they raised it anyway. And there's nothing you can do about it. So, you know, if we're going to go into this, even if you go into a PBID, you want a different board structure. You want to make sure all the board members are elected, because you can't replace anybody. And so one of the things about that, they send an employee, so there's 2 elected members of the board, Francis Collins, and the other seat is vacant. And the other seat is vacant because they used to just find somebody to take that seat. So when I got involved in it, well, I said, well, why Francis, why don't you run for the seat? Because he owns some residential property. So they changed the rules to make him uneligible. They said, this used to be a seat that was held by a PBID person that had residential property, but now it's going to be only direct bill property. So they changed the rules so he couldn't be eligible. But he ran for the seat as a business member and he won. So anyway,
Quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Who runs the PBID now?
Well, Jeff Sears is the president of the board.
Okay, Jeff Sears, IKEA.
And by the way, when he says to you that he's paying the biggest amount, $375,000 a year, his tenants are paying that money. He's not paying anything. And I gotta make that real clear, so he's not paying anything, so he's really happy to tell you he's paying all that money, but he's not really paying. Okay.
What's PBID I stand for?
Okay, it's Business Improvement District, property-based business improvement
Oh, I
district.
see it.
Any other questions?
Let's see the business.
Okay, yeah, let's get it on. And then while we're waiting, if anybody has any legal questions, Stuart's there, he can answer them if anybody's got any questions.
I didn't hear if there was an answer about who would be running the new PBID if we all vote for the city.
It hasn't been defined yet. The governance structure for the new PBID has not been defined, nor for that matter has the assessment structure been defined yet. So there's supposed to be an engineer's report coming out. The engineer's report is supposed to define what's the relationship between the properties and the benefit. So it's supposed to identify a formula that can be used to define how much benefit each individual property gets. And that's based on a variety of things. It's based on, for example, who's riding the Emery go-round right now, like at least in general, in terms of which stops are most of the people who are using the Emery go-round using, and which stops are not being used much. Then you look at how close are those properties to those stops, and how many people can be expected. So for example, if you're Wareham and you've got, say, 500 employees living, working in a building that's right by the Emery go-round stop, then you would be expected to pay based on that 500 employees that are all have the ability to use that. Not certainly they're all going to all use the Emery go-round, but they all have the ability to use the Emery go-round. And likewise, for example, for a single-family residence, there's an assumption, well, if you're a single-family residence and you live along the Emery go-round route, then the people who live in that single-family residence have the ability to use the Emery go-round, and so there'd be an assessment, and it would be just a standard assessment based on the average occupancy of single-family homes. Here in Watergate, it would be based on the occupancy of the average unit here in Watergate. So that, and it's supposed to be done, again, based on the benefit, the special benefit, and the benefit that we're talking about is the ability to use the Emery go-round, the accessibility of the Emery go-round. The reason why it was mentioned, the triangle, which is the area at the southern end of Emeryville that's east of San Pablo Avenue, the reason why they're not in the assessment district is because they don't have any service from the Emery go-round to that part of Emeryville. It's the only part of Emeryville that isn't covered. So obviously, they're not getting any benefit, so you really would be very unfair to try and assess them for a benefit they're not getting. But the nature of how much individual property owners will be paying would have to be set by the engineer's report that figures out how much benefit a different property owner is getting. And then the governance right now is really undefined, but presumably it ought to be related to the benefits and to the assessments. In other words, people who are getting assessed more would have more say in the governance of the district than people who are not getting assessed much. Given that the assessment for single-family homes is going to be probably pretty small, the per parcel, and in terms of any sort of voting on the governance, that's going to be on a per parcel basis. So it's not one person, one vote, it's one parcel, one vote. But the parcel vote is going to be based on the assessment. So if you're assessed more, your parcel has more votes on it than a parcel that has less of an assessment. Yeah.
Isn't it true that there's special assessment, but there's also general assessment based on benefits to the general area? Like the city, for example, it's a general benefit because it has reduced traffic. So the city will have to pay monies.
Well, the way it works is essentially you look at the total ridership of the Emery go-round, and you can ask how much of that ridership is people who are paying for a special benefit. And then the remaining part is basically a general benefit. And so it can't be, you can't assess, so for example, let's say that there are people who are using the Emery go-round to get through Emeryville to, let's say they want to get to West Oakland, or maybe to West Berkeley, and they're using the Emery go-round to get from MacArthur BART over to West Berkeley, and then they're getting off and walking to someplace else. Well, they're not paying any assessment, so their use of the Emery go-round can't be charged to the special assessment district, because that would be unfair, because they're not, why should the special assessment district be paying for somebody who's not in it? So that becomes a general assessment, And that one, I believe that the city has said it's probably going to pick up the tab for that part of the assessment, for that part of the cost that can't be tagged to the assessment district members. So somebody's got to pay it, and the city has basically said, okay, we'll
It
pay
can't
it
be
because we're
PBID
getting
because it's
benefit.
not a special assessment.
I'm sorry?
And it cannot be under the PBID because it's not a special benefit.
Right, you can't, you can only assess someone under the PBID if they're getting a special benefit. Well, obviously, these people who are not Emeryville residents or Emeryville business owners or Emeryville employees or even Emeryville shoppers who you might be able to assess the businesses they're shopping at. If they have no connection to Emeryville and they're just using it to get through the city, who are you going to assess for that? There's nobody in the PBID who can be assessed for that.
Well, presumably the city would get to have votes based upon the
That's-
general benefit.
That's right. So there'd be a city, the city has votes in two ways. The city has votes because there are city properties that are within the PBIDs and presumed, like for example, City Hall. City Hall employees can use the PBID, can use the Emery-go-round therefore. And therefore, because City Hall employees have access to the Emery-go-round, then the city gets assessed as a special assessment for City Hall. And likewise for other city-owned properties, to the extent that those city-owned properties have employees associated that could use the Emery-go-round. In addition, there would be votes the city would get because it's paying the general assessment.
Isn't it true that the council can say that they would like to stop the PBID by a supermajority, that they don't have to extend it?
That is true. The council can basically terminate the PBID if it wants to. Because it's created by the city and it can be ended by the city.
Okay, so this is an Emeryville board meeting where they talked about the assessments and assessing residents and, so.
Turn it down.
I'm gonna try to do this.
So whether that's enough or not, a positive number that is funded is better than not. So on a positive progress, but it isn't done. So those two things are important.
And I have said that the placeholder, and since we don't have an actual site identified, we don't know what the true cost of that is. But also having funding in the capital improvement plan for that, will allow us to be able to come up with some matching, which a lot of times grants require that we have some matching. So it was really done so to position ourselves to begin some grants, but it will also show that this was a priority and ready.
So I've got just a couple more things, and then Joyce will get to you. So we did you asked, why are we not working hard to get other people's money? I think we all agree that if other people's money can pay for any amount of what we pay for in ourselves, we'd all be for that. No one's going to argue about that. So
I don't want other people's money. Take the money that we put into the sales tax to give us a fair amount.
Let's not get into semantics. What we asked formally from the city was to share with the TMA, we talked about this in the last board meeting, to share some costs for advocacy, call it lobbying, call it aggressive, pursuit. But, money, you gotta spend some money to make some money. We asked them to share an effort to do that with us. That, they're still talking about that, it isn't approved. So that also, because everyone would love it if we could get that sales tax money or any or other sources of money, but if you don't prioritize people to do it, they're not going to do it. You've heard Karen say the staff is very short-handed. If the council doesn't prioritize it in terms of telling staff, you got to do it, and here's some money for third parties to help you because we know you're understaffed, and maybe they're better at it in Sacramento or wherever at the county level, that's really important too. So that's under discussion, but not a approved. So,
The city does have a lobbyist that we use, and one thing I think Sabrina may have discussed this with you on Bridge, that, the city certainly, is open to sitting down with the TMA and the consultant that we already have, to see how they, Townsend Group, how they can do more than they already are doing, specifically for issues with the.
so those are the things we've talked about here, and we're pushing the city on. We see positive response, but we need to keep reinforcing our strong feelings about it so it actually happens. That's really, I think, what I want to stress, and that's all going to happen in the next 2 months, right? These decisions about allocation of resources at the city level is going to happen. And then just a side thing, we're here for the TMA. We all represent big users and big and little property owners and all that, residents, businesses. The city, you said they always made do without big transfer taxes. That's true because they had tons of redevelopment money. So there's no question that the city is desperately looking for alternative revenue sources.
And French is right, the charter city drive, I think is revenue,
But
that's because we're going to do
So,
it.
I don't want to get into a discussion that's sort of beyond the TMA, but to the extent you all have your own interests that relate to focusing on what the city is charging people to create revenue, you should just pay attention because it's all being discussed now. On the TMA's behalf, I pointed out to the city that if they're interested in seeing the PBID funded, continued, that is a vote by us. At many council meetings, residents will stand up and say, we vote, and businesses don't, and the businesses are here at our pleasure. And that's an acceptable position for them to have. But with the PBID, we vote. Okay, we don't vote for council people unless we live in the city, but we all vote for the PBID. And I pointed out that if you put tens of types of other costs on us, you run the risk that we don't vote for that. And it's worth $2.6 million now, So I'm just encouraging you all, it's all being talked about now. And so you just gotta, unfortunately, get a little invested to follow it. I was heartened that they had about 4 different revenue sources they were considering, and they crossed off 2 or 3 at the last meeting, because there were a whole bunch being considered. But development fees were increased, they're in process of being increased. Charter City can let you charge.
I guess the point of looking at this is that you don't want to see any retaliation if the city imposes these taxes. I mean, that's what he's saying here. We control the PBID, and if they tax us too much, we may not approve it. They control over the service. They should not have unilateral control over the service. There's got to be some process where people can go to City Hall and complain, and that the bus can be restored, changed, moved, or whatever has to be done. And so that's one of the things I'm saying. Now, when I suggested the idea of that half-cent sales tax, the city council wasn't interested. So even though they weren't interested, I still went to the county and was to it, and we got it to change the expenditure plan. And so that's the next thing I want to show you. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we get too
Yes, sir.
far into the history of things and that sort of thing, are you building up to a point that is, how are we going to make any effect on the council? Because the PBID has already been voted on. It's going to go onto the ballot in June or July, whenever it is.
No, it hasn't been.
Huh?
They haven't,
The ballot will be sent out to us sometime.
I have not.
Only the owners.
well, they haven't decided that they're gonna send out the ballot, but see, they don't want to look at any other option. And I
Well, that's
think-
what I'm asking.
and I-
So how do we, how do we take the super tanker, which seems to be headed in a specific direction, and have it change direction?
Well,
What are you getting at?
we get the council, there's one member here, we get the council to look at other options. We can wait another year before this is approved, because the funding doesn't run out to the end of 2016. So what they're doing now is they're putting this out there, and if it's not approved, then you're gonna have another opportunity to vote on it. And I think we should take the next 6 months and take a look at what we're doing here, make sure you get the insurances that you want, and you should create a district that is a public bus system, not a private one. Karen says, well, if you're a public system, you have to comply with federal requirements. But you don't have to comply with those requirements if you don't take any federal money. here we can get 2/3 of the budget from Alameda County. And probably a lot of it from the state cap and trade money. You wouldn't have to pay much assessment at all. But if you went with the existing governance structure, you have a corporate board there, so the residential seat on the board is meaningless. It's not even occupied. So, that's what I'm saying. Right.
Can you, or Stu, can you specify what power the council has? It can establish the PBID, it can terminate. What else can it do within the parameters of the district?
Well, one of the things that the council does, or the city does, is negotiate with the PBID in terms of a contract between the city and the PBID in terms of running the Emeryville. And that contract can have a lot of things in it. Doesn't usually do, but it could, for example, the city could specify how it wants to see the governance of the PBID done. And it doesn't have to just sort of accept whatever the PBID suggests it wants. That is to say that the corporate members of the PBID want as the governance structure.
So it would not have to be weighted? Aren't there some regulations?
It would have to, you obviously have to have the PBID to some extent has to some, the governance of the PBID has to bear some relationship to the funding of the PBID. But it doesn't have to be exact. I mean, right now, it's nowhere close to exact.
It does not have to be.
And it doesn't have to be exact. The way they've got it run now, it basically gives a tremendous advantage to those 7 corporate owners. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's up to the city to decide what it's willing to accept.
Now, Stuart, couldn't we create an advisory board for those property owners, and couldn't the council make the final decision? Is that a feasible possibility?
How do you mean?
So in other words, if you have that board right now, right? If you had that board was elected, couldn't they advise the council, and couldn't the council make the final decision on it? Or is that not possible with a PBID?
It's not possible with the PBID. The council can't be controlling the PBID because it's not the city. It's a separate entity.
Okay, so if we had another type of assessment district, then that would be possible, right?
That's right. You could have a transportation assessment district that would be run by the city.
Okay.
Just the same as there are lighting and landscape assessment districts that are run by the city.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what would be those?
Right.
What would be those advantages? It seems to me that the city should have, it provides fire, it provides police, it provides certain health protections. It should have a transportation arm.
So and that would be essentially, if you were going to set up a transportation assessment district, that would essentially be a way of running for the city to run the transit.
What would be the advantage or disadvantage?
Well, the disadvantage to the city from having it run by the city is it takes staff time. And there'd have to be city staff to run it. Like again, for example, a lot of cities have landscape and lighting assessment districts. Those have people in the public works department that are involved in running those districts. And they are on the city employee. Now, they're actually usually paid, at least to the extent that those employees are working on those landscape and lighting districts. They're paid out of the funds from the landscape and lighting district. But they're still city employees.
They could contract out with the people they contract out now. The board doesn't really do hardly anything. They just contract out with the TMA.
Well, I'm not sure if you could do the same sort of thing, because remember then, because you're talking about a public entity. And so that, there are issues about the employees of that public entity, the public entity.
Well, they're union employees. They could certainly contract it out. At least we should look at it.
Yeah.
So would they not need a parcel tax to pay for the extra staff?
Well, that's what I'm saying. There would be a transportation assessment district. So it would still be an assessment district. It just wouldn't be the same kind. It would be a property-based assessment district. It wouldn't be a private property-based assessment district. It would be a city assessment. Yeah.
Why is it that AC Transit has seemingly a much more stringent paratransit component to their service than Emeryville? For example, AC Transit is required to have buses, to have
AC Transit gets federal funding.
Right, that's right.
So AC Transit is under the Federal Transit Authority, Transit Administration, FTA. And so the FTA sets regulations, and the AC Transit has to follow those regulations. because it's getting federal funding.
And the reason you don't have AC transit service out here is because there's nowhere for the bus to turn around. They don't want to go all the way out to the end and turn around like they used to, and that's why they stopped the service here. Because there is no turning around. And the Emeryville is going out there too, so at some point, somebody should engineer a turnaround so that you can have any kind of bus turnaround. Yeah, Doug?
Yeah, well, I already did that. I already engineered a turnaround and I took it to the city.
Well, you took it to the
You, and the rest of the board members.
You took it to the TMA, because I was at the meeting when you did, you went to the
I
board.
presented the TMA as well.
Yeah, they just, not interested. Yeah.
I need a little bit of background here. The Emeryville Transportation Management Association, I assume, is the TMA.
Right.
Can you tell me how that particular association is structured? Is it employees, is it elected people?
That's what we're talking about here. That's the 7 corporate members.
That's the 7 corporate members, okay.
So when they created that district, they created a separate class of corporate members who would control the board.
Okay.
But they pay the same assessment as the business members, so there really is no difference. And one of the things about setting up those corporations is that you have to get the membership to approve those bylaws, and they never did that. Because it also says that you need a unanimous vote to dissolve the PBID, that corporation. And nobody's ever gonna get a unanimous vote. I mean, that was set up so it couldn't be taken apart. I would bet that even if the council wanted to make it a public system, the city attorney's gonna say, well, you can't do that to this region and that region. And we don't wanna be trapped into that thing. We don't wanna be trapped into that control. We wanna have access to the control. You have a follow-up, ma'am?
So the city set up this association and they
No,
let, who set up the association?
The property owner set up the association, but the city basically assisted or agreed to it.
And then who set the rules of who could join? I mean, as 7 businesses and 1 other person.
Well, what happens is when you come in with a project, the city requires you to join. So you become an automatic member when you get a project approved and you have to use that as a mitigation. But those property owners, they become involved and they have no control. They don't realize that let's face it, the former city manager was very tight with the developers. And he really put this thing together to help them save money and to give them control. 'Cause, I mean, when I used to meet with the city manager, he would tell me things like, with the project in San Diego, well, we got Blockbusters as a tenant. And I used to say to myself, what do you, you and the, he was a partner with the developers. He actually made a deal with these developers that he would get his project through the process without alteration. And so whenever the planning commission would ask for something, he'd come back and say, well, gee, it's not possible. I mean, there were so many decisions that were take it or leave it, because that's how the state people operate. They were in bed with the developers, they were in bed with Wareham, where they tried to do the North Hollis district, and you got a transit center property out there, where the city is giving that developer millions and millions of dollars. And so that's how the city used to work, the city manager. I mean, that's the way it is, so that's why it was set up that way. So their expenses got dropped substantially once everybody started paying for it, because they still have the majority of use.
So the current proposal is that the businesses will pay 80% of this and the residents will pay 20%.
There's no defined, it hasn't been defined yet. That's what the engineer's report is going to define, is what's the benefit for different types of properties, and then what's the corresponding assessment. So you may have heard a figure of 80 and 20, thrown around. But there's nothing, until the engineer's report comes in, you can guess whatever you want, but it won't, it doesn't have nothing behind it.
Yeah, so I was at the board meeting earlier this month, so the discussion from the lady in the video was that this engineer, who hired the engineer? Is there a bias? Is that legitimate? I don't understand.
This is the same engineer that set up the existing one-family structure. It's the same guy. He's been working with them for years, so, it would have been nice if they would have looked for somebody else to get an objective opinion.
Well, there is a difference, and the difference is that there have been court opinions, court decisions that have come out that have really narrowed what's allowed to be done with an assessment district. And so they are basically, they know that if they go too far astray, they'll get sued.
But still, it says in that thing that each property owner is supposed to get an amount of benefit which is commensurate with what they're paying. And the city's never shown anybody that they're getting that.
Well, that's what the engineer's report is supposed to do. It's supposed to demonstrate, here's the benefit being conferred to this property, so therefore here's their assessment. Here's the benefit being conferred to this property, so therefore that's their assessment. And that, it's supposed to lay out a formula that says for this type of property, this is what benefit you're getting and this is the assessment. Now, if that formula is arbitrary, doesn't work, doesn't really correspond to the benefits that are really being conferred, then as the court case that was mentioned in that article points out, it's the courts can step in and say, no, that doesn't work, that assessment is void.
Well, this is a square footage this is an assessment based on square footage. So you have a small retail shop that's gonna pay the same rate as like here.
It's not just based on square footage, that's what I'm saying. It's going to be more, as was said at the last
We have a question that
meeting,
man back here
it's
has
more
been
fine grained.
Okay, Mark?
asking.
Yeah, my assessment is a little bit basic, but I think it needs to be said. Karen Hemphill came here to speak to us, and she said that Emery-go-round carries 1.7 million riders. So I thought to myself, this is crazy. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I took a 360-day year and I divided it up, and it comes pretty close to 5,000 riders a day.
Right.
Saturday, Sunday included, not quite 5,000, depends how you play with the numbers. I doubt that Watergate and its residents generates 500 rides a day, 250 in the morning, 250 at night, and a few stragglers during the
So
day.
you get 10% of the assessment.
Less. I don't
Yeah.
think it generates it. And any assessment that comes back from an engineer that says we're responsible for 20% or any other number like that should be discredited because it's baloney. And I don't think Emery-go-round carries 1.7 million riders.
Well, one of the things I'm thinking about doing before they come out is going out to the BART stations and standing there and asking every passenger, what is your destination and are you a resident or not? Because then I could find, because I don't believe those. She actually said she sliced and diced the numbers that came back because they weren't acceptable the first time.
Karen, when she was here 2 weeks ago, I asked her about that, if it was an audited ridership survey, and she said it was, and it would be ready, and it had just gotten done, be ready about now, and I emailed her today to see if I could get a copy of it. So.
What did she say?
Well, I don't know yet.
But what she-
Because I'm looking for those same numbers.
Okay.
She said they went out and they did a sample of certain riders and then they made an assumption on the rest of them, that's what they did. And that's not accurate, not enough for assessment. Sir?
So aside from the court interpretation ruling, what is your both opinions about the engineer's unbiased opinion on doing what we're doing? Because everybody's referring to the engineer.
Right.
What is your hit on that?
Well, I don't know, we may have different opinions.
That's fine.
I tend to think that engineers have got to be a little bit careful, because if they get successfully sued, there goes their reputation. So I would expect, particularly if the engineer is aware of the fact, and I think we're trying to make him aware of the fact that this is being closely watched, and that if it's not done properly, he will get sued, or at least the city will get sued, and he'll end up getting caught in that. So if I was him, I would start being a little bit careful about it. At least-
Well, he made a comment at the first presentation, he said, you can't get away with what you used to be able to get away with these days. Couldn't help but note that comment.
Well, again, that's what that court decision said. That court decision said that now that Prop 218 is the law, that changed the standard. And the cities don't get to get away with what they used to be able to get away with.
Well, just the idea that you want to get away with anything is not right, I mean. But,
Okay.
go ahead,
Is
Dan.
it unreasonable to have volunteers be at the stops here at Watergate, say for a month, and check how many people get on and off?
You know what, it's not
If people are willing to do it.
It's not a reasonable fact, I'd like to take on that project, I'd like to do a report, so that most of the people going, and just ask them, are you a resident, where are you going? Then we can find out, so if we can put together a few volunteers, that's great. Steven?
I was just curious, when you mentioned being sued, who would be the one who is suing? Is that me?